The December snow fell steadily outside the kitchen window of the suburban Denver home where I'd grown up. At 34, I still felt like a kid walking through that front door. The familiar scent of my mother's cinnamon rolls and pine candles wrapping around me like a warm embrace. The house looked exactly the same. Same beige walls, same family photos lining the hallway, same creaky third step that had betrayed my teenage attempts at sneaking out. "Marcus, honey, you're early," Mom called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that particular mix of joy and mild panic that meant she was still preparing for our annual Christmas Eve dinner. She appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron, her graying hair pulled back in the same messy bun she'd worn for decades. "Traffic wasn't as bad as I expected," I said, setting down my overnight bag and giving her a hug. "Where's Dad?" "He's in the garage, tinkering with that old radio again. You know how he gets when he's nervous about hosting?" She wiped her hands on her apron, and I noticed something different in her expression, a fleeting look of discomfort that she quickly covered with a smile. "Why don't you go put your things upstairs? Dinner will be ready in about an hour." I grabbed my bag and headed toward the staircase, my feet automatically finding the familiar path. The second-floor hallway was dimmer than I remembered. Afternoon. Light filtering through the curtains in a way that made everything seem slightly off-kilter. I reached for the doorknob of my old bedroom, the room that had been mine from age 5 until I left for college, and stopped. The door was locked. I tried the handle again, thinking maybe it was just stuck. The old house had its quirks, after all. But no, there was definitely a new deadbolt installed where there had never been one before. Confused, I knocked gently. "Mom?" I called down the stairs. "Why is my room locked?" The clattering of pots and pans from the kitchen stopped abruptly. A moment later, I heard my mother's footsteps on the hardwood floor, moving more slowly than usual. She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face flushed in a way that had nothing to do with the heat from the oven. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice carrying an odd strain. "I meant to tell you. We're having you stay in the guest room this year. Your old room is... Well, it's being used for something else right now. The guest room. It's a small, cramped space at the end of the hall that had always been reserved for distant relatives and my parents' college friends. It had a twin bed, a single dresser, and a window that looked out onto the neighbor's chain-link fence. It was functional, but it wasn't home. Used for what? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual despite the growing knot in my stomach. Eyes darted away from mine. Just ... storage. You know how your father accumulates things. I'll explain everything later, sweetie. Why didn't you get settled in the guest room? I really need to check on the turkey. She disappeared back into the kitchen before I could ask. Any more questions? Leaving me standing in the hallway with my bag? Staring at the locked door that had once opened onto 13 years of my life? The room where I'd built blanket forts? Where I'd stayed up late reading by flashlight? Where I'd practiced guitar badly enough to make the neighbors complain? The room where I'd cried over my first heartbreak and celebrated my acceptance too? College, I walked to the guest room and pushed open the door. The space felt even smaller than I remembered, the single bed taking up most of the floor space. The walls were bare, except for a generic landscape painting that had been there since my childhood. It smelled faintly of mothballs and disused. As I unpacked my few belongings, I could hear my parents' voices drifting up from the kitchen, my mother's higher-pitched explanations mixing with my father's deeper, more measured responses. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clearly one of discussion, possibly argument. Whatever was going on with my room wasn't just about storage. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked around the cramped space. Through the thin walls, I could hear the Hendersons' television next door, the sound of their dog barking at something in their backyard. This room had always felt temporary, like a place you stayed when you were passing through, not like home. The smell of roasting turkey began to fill the house, mixing with the scent of my mother's traditional sage stuffing and the green bean casserole that had been a staple of our Christmas dinners for as long as I could remember. These were the smells of home, of tradition, of belonging. But sitting in this guest room, I felt more like a visitor than I ever had before. The dining room table was set with my grandmother's good china, the plates that only came out for Christmas and Easter. The centerpiece was the same artificial poinsettia arrangement my mother had used for the past 15 years, its red fabric petals slightly faded, but still festive. Everything looked exactly as it had every Christmas of my adult life, except for the notable absence of my usual seat. "Marcus, you can sit there," Mom said, gesturing to the chair that had always been reserved for guests. The one with the slightly wobbly leg that required you to sit carefully to avoid tilting. My regular spot. The chair with the perfect view of both the kitchen and the living room was now occupied by a stack of mail and what looked like financial documents. Dad emerged from the kitchen carrying the turkey, his face red from the heat of the oven and possibly something else. He'd always been a quiet man, but tonight he seemed particularly subdued. Avoiding eye contact as he set the bird down on the table, we went through the familiar ritual of carving the turkey and passing dishes around the table. I complimented Mom on the stuffing, asked Dad about his latest woodworking project, and tried to pretend that everything was normal. But the conversation felt forced, like we were all reading from a script we'd forgotten the lines to. "So, how's work been?" Dad asked, stabbing at his mashed potatoes with more force than necessary. "Good," I said, launching into the same update I'd given them over the phone the previous week. The marketing campaign for the Denver Tourism Board is going well. We're hoping to expand the contract next year. "That's nice, dear," Mom said, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Her eyes kept darting toward the kitchen, then toward Dad, then back to her plate. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the clink of silverware against china and the distant sound of Christmas music from the neighbor's house. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, so I said, trying to keep my voice light, "What's the deal with my room?" When you said storage, I was expecting maybe some boxes, not a deadbolt. My parents exchanged a look across the table, one of those married couple communications that happens entirely without words. Mom's face went pale, and Dad set down his fork with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Marcus," Mom began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk to you about something." The knot in my stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" Dad cleared his throat. "Son, your mother and I? We're having some financial difficulties. Have been for a while now." The words hung in the air like smoke. Financial difficulties. My parents had always been middle-class stable, not wealthy, but comfortable. Dad had worked at the same accounting firm for 30 years, and Mom had her part-time job at the local library. "What kind of difficulties?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. "Your father's company downsized last year," Mom said, her voice growing stronger as she found her footing in the conversation. "He's been doing freelance work, but it's not enough. We've been struggling to make the mortgage payments." Dad added, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. "We've had to make some ... adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" Another look passed between them. This time, Mom was the one who answered. "We've been renting out your room, Marcus, to help with the bills." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Renting it out? To a graduate student?" "From the university," Dad said quickly. "She's very quiet, very respectful. She needed a place to stay while she finishes her dissertation, and we needed the income." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. "You rented out my room? My childhood bedroom? You haven't lived here in over 10 years, Mom said, and there was a defensive edge to her voice now. "You have your own apartment in the city. You only come home for holidays." "But it's still my room," I said, and I heard how childish I sounded even as the words left my mouth. "I mean, it's where I grew up. It's where all my stuff is." "We packed everything up," Dad said. "It's all in the basement." Nothing was thrown away. The basement. My childhood belongings, my memories, relegated to the damp, musty space where we'd always stored things we didn't want, but couldn't bear to get rid of. "How long?" I asked. "Since September," Mom said quietly. "For months." For 4 months, my room had belonged to someone else. 4 months of a stranger sleeping in my bed, using my desk, looking out my window at the oak tree I'd climbed as a kid. "Didn't you tell me?" I asked. "We didn't want to worry you," Dad said, "and we thought... we hoped it would be temporary." "But they haven't," I said. It wasn't a question. "No," Mom admitted, "they haven't." I excused myself from dinner. claiming I needed some air, and found myself standing in the backyard despite the December cold. The snow was still falling, covering the familiar landscape of my childhood in pristine white. The swing set Dad had built when I was 7 was still there, though one of the swings had been removed. The remaining chains hung empty. The back of the house looked different from this angle. I could see the second-floor window of my old room, and there was a soft, warm light glowing behind the curtains. Not the harsh overhead light I'd always used, but something gentler, more intimate. A desk lamp, maybe, or string lights. The kind of lighting that spoke of someone who had made the space their own. I stood there for a long time. Watching that window, trying to reconcile the room, I remembered with the reality of what it had become. Eventually, the cold drove me back inside, where I found my parents in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner in a silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. "Her name is Sarah," Mom said, without looking up from the sink. "She's getting her PhD in environmental science. She's been working on her dissertation for 3 years. I didn't ask, but Mom seemed to need to keep talking. She's from Oregon originally. Her parents died in a car accident when she was in undergraduate school, so she doesn't have family to go home to for the holidays. She's spending Christmas with her advisor's family." The information felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. This Sarah person wasn't just a stranger renting my room. She was a real person with a real life, real struggles, real relationships. "She pays $800 a month," Dad added, drying a plate with mechanical precision. "It's not much, but it helps with the mortgage." $800. The sum felt both significant and impossibly small. "How bad is it?" I asked. "The financial situation, I mean." Dad set down the plate and turned to face me. "Bad enough that we're considering selling the house?" The words hit me like a second blow. "Selling the house? We're behind on the mortgage," Mom said, her voice barely audible. 3 months behind? "If we can't catch up by February, the bank will start foreclosure proceedings." I felt dizzy. This house, this place that had been the constant in my life for as long as I could remember, was in danger of being lost. "Why didn't you tell me how bad things were?" I asked. "What would you have done?" Dad asked, and there was no accusation in his voice, just genuine curiosity. "You have your own life, your own expenses. We didn't want to burden you with our problems." Wanted to protest, to say that I would have helped, that I would have found a way. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what I could have done. My marketing job paid well enough for my 1-bedroom apartment and my own expenses. But I didn't have thousands of dollars sitting around. "I should go up and get some sleep," I said finally. "Marcus," Mom called as I headed toward the stairs. "We're still your parents. This is still your home. The room situation. It's just temporary." I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed her. Or maybe I wasn't sure what temporary meant anymore. The guest room felt even smaller that night. I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Somewhere down the hall, behind the locked door of my old room, a stranger was probably settling in for the night. I thought about the $800 she paid each month, money that was helping my parents keep their home. I thought about the deadbolt on my door, the physical barrier between me and the space that had once been mine. I thought about the basement, where my belongings were stored like artifacts from a life that no longer existed. But mostly, I thought about the fact that I'd been living in my own apartment for over a decade, building my own life, while my parents struggled in silence. I woke up to the sound of voices in the kitchen, my parents. Familiar tones mixed with one I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, younger than my mother's, speaking in the careful cadence of someone who was still getting used to being part of a household. Checked my phone. 7:23 a.m. on Christmas morning, no less. I'd always been an early riser, but apparently, so was my parents' tenant. I pulled on a sweatshirt and padded downstairs, following the scent of coffee and the sound of conversation. The kitchen scene stopped me in the doorway. Parents were sitting at the breakfast table with a young woman I'd never seen before, mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and wearing an oversized sweater. She was holding a mug of coffee in both hands. "Marcus," Mom said, her voice bright with a kind of forced cheer that meant she was nervous. "Come meet Sarah." The woman Sarah turned to look at me, and I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Recognition? Maybe, or embarrassment. She knew who I was, which meant my parents had told her about me. "Hi," she said, standing up and extending her hand. "I'm Sarah. I'm really sorry about the room situation. I know this must be weird for you." Her handshake was firm, her voice direct. She wasn't trying to be overly friendly or apologetic, just honest. "It's okay," I said, though I wasn't sure if it was. "I'm Marcus. I know," she said with a slight smile. "Your parents talk about you a lot." "Sarah was just telling us about her research," Dad said, clearly trying to fill the awkward silence. "She's studying the effects of urban development on local water systems." "It's really interesting," I said, settling into the remaining chair at the table. Mom immediately got up to pour me coffee. "It's incredibly boring, actually," Sarah said, "but someone has to do it. The city planning department needs the data to make informed decisions about new construction projects." "Here in Denver?" "All over Colorado, actually, but Denver's my primary focus. The population growth over the past decade has been incredible, but the infrastructure hasn't kept pace." I found myself genuinely interested, despite the circumstances. "What kind of infrastructure? Water treatment mainly? Stormwater management?" "The city's been approving new developments without fully understanding the impact on the local watershed." "That's actually really important work," I said, and I meant it. "Tell that to my dissertation committee," Sarah said wryly. "I've been working on it for 3 years. I should have been done by now, but life happens. I'm hoping to defend next spring." "And then what?" "Then I'll probably move back to Oregon, maybe get a job with the state environmental agency." There was something wistful in her voice when she mentioned Oregon. "I should let you all have your Christmas morning," Sarah said, standing up and carrying her mug to the sink. "I have some writing to do anyway. You don't have to hide upstairs," Mom said quickly. "This is your home too. Thanks, but I really do need to work." She paused at the kitchen doorway. "Marcus, it was nice meeting you. Hope you have a good Christmas." After she left, the kitchen felt oddly empty, despite the fact that my parents and I were still there. "She seems nice," I said. "She is," Mom said. "She's been wonderful to have around. She helps with groceries sometimes, and she fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. She's good company for your mother," Dad added. "Someone to talk to." During the day, I realized that my parents' lives had probably been lonelier than I'd understood. With me living in the city and only visiting on holidays, they'd been rattling around in this house by themselves for years. Having Sarah there probably filled a need I hadn't even known existed. Christmas Day passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. We opened gifts in the living room, the same ritual we'd performed for decades, but with Sarah's presence adding an unexpected dynamic. She'd bought small gifts for my parents, a nice bottle of wine, a book about Colorado history, and they'd gotten her a warm scarf and a coffee shop gift card my parents had gotten me. The usual assortment of practical gifts: new clothes, a nice watch, a coffee table book about national parks. I'd brought them a framed photo of the three of us from my college graduation and a generous gift card to their favorite restaurant. After lunch, Sarah excused herself to make phone calls. "2 friends back in Oregon. Christmas check-ins," she explained. After she went upstairs, I found myself alone with my parents in the living room. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the familiar furniture. "I've been thinking," I said, settling into the chair I'd always claimed as mine during holiday visits. "It's about the money situation." Marcus's dad began, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know I can't solve everything, but I can help. I've been putting money away for a down payment on a house, but that can wait. I can give you enough to catch up on the mortgage payments." My parents exchanged one of their looks, but this time it was different, surprised, maybe even hopeful. "How much do you have saved?" Mom asked quietly. "About 15,000. Not enough to solve everything, but it's enough to buy you some time." "Son," Dad said, his voice thick with emotion, "we can't take your house money." "Why not? This is my house too. If I can help you keep it, then that's what I want to do." "But your future," Mom protested. "Your own plans. My plans can wait. Is more important. We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Dad spoke. That's incredibly generous, Marcus. But even if we caught up on the mortgage, we'd still need to find a way to make the regular payments. What if there was a way to increase your income permanently, I asked. What if you didn't just rent out my room? What if you turned the whole house into a boarding house? We couldn't, Mom said immediately. This is our home. Still your home, I said. But it could also be your business. You could rent out my room permanently and maybe convert the basement into another apartment. You'd have enough income to not only make the mortgage payments, but to build up some savings. Dad was quiet for a long moment. That would be a lot of work, he said finally. I could help with that too, I said. Not just the money, but the work. I could take vacation time, help with renovations. What about your life in the city? Mom asked. I'd still have that, but I could be more involved here. The idea was taking shape as I spoke, and I realized it felt right in a way that surprised me. Sarah would be your first permanent tenant, I continued. She seems to like it here. And she's got at least another year before she finishes her dissertation. It's a big change, Dad said. So is losing the house, I pointed out, from upstairs. I could hear Sarah's voice, animated and happy as she talked to someone from home. The sound made the house feel lived in, purposeful. Let me think about it, Dad said finally. Whatever you decide, I want to help with the mortgage payments. That's not negotiable. Mom got up from her chair and came over to hug me. Thank you, she whispered. That evening I found myself in the kitchen making hot chocolate. The house was quiet. My parents had gone to bed early. Sarah was presumably still working upstairs. I was stirring the cocoa when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking tired but more relaxed than she had. That morning? Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Too much to think about, I said. Want some hot chocolate? That sounds perfect. I made her a cup and we sat at the kitchen table. The silence between us was comfortable. Two people who understood what it meant to be displaced from the places they'd called home. Your parents? Told me about the mortgage situation, Sarah said eventually. I'm sorry. I know this must be incredibly stressful. It is, I said. But I'm more sorry that I didn't know about it sooner. I feel like I should have been more involved. You can't be responsible for everything, Sarah said gently. Sometimes people don't tell you things because they want to protect you. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure. If my parents decide to turn this into a more permanent boarding house situation, would you want to stay? I mean, beyond just finishing your dissertation? Sarah considered this. I don't know, she said finally. I've been planning to move back to Oregon for so long, but ... I like it here. I like your parents. And Denver's growing so fast that there's going to be a lot of demand for environmental consulting. So you might stay? I might. And you'd be okay with that? With me living in your room permanently? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding all day. I think I would be, I said slowly. I think I've been holding on to the idea of that room as some kind of security blanket. But the truth is, my place here isn't about a room. It's about the people in this house. That's very mature of you, Sarah said with a slight smile. Don't give me too much credit. I'm still figuring it out. We finished our hot chocolate in comfortable silence. And when Sarah went back upstairs, I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected. Hope. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee for everyone when my parents came downstairs. I was ready with a proposal. I've been thinking about the boarding house idea, I said, and I think we should do it. What if I moved back to Denver? Got a job here, lived in the guest room until we could convert the basement into a proper apartment for me? I could help manage the boarding house, handle the business side of things. You'd leave your job in the city? Mom asked. I'd find a new one. The marketing skills are transferable, and Denver's economy is growing. But your independence, Mom protested. This wouldn't be giving up my independence, I said. It would be choosing to build my independence in a different place, with different people. It would be choosing family. I looked around the kitchen, at the familiar walls and the morning light streaming through the windows. My parents, who had given me everything and asked for nothing in return. I want to come home, I said, not to my childhood bedroom, but to this family. To help build something new while honoring what's always been here, Dad reached across the table and took my hand. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said. Let's do this together. And for the first time in years, sitting in that kitchen with my parents, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.